What if the silence around you isn't empty, but listening? And when you finally sense it, will it already be too close to escape? Welcome to Classic Storytime Hub. Tonight's story is The Listener by Algernon Blackwood, a classic horror story reimagined and retold for the modern age. September 4th. London doesn't give itself up easily. I walked its streets for days, searching, calculating. £120 a year doesn't stretch far in a city that swallows men whole. But then, just when the search had begun to feel like defeat, I found them. 2 rooms. No modern conveniences, no charm by most standards. The building leaned into its own age with a kind of stubborn dignity, worn at every edge, the kind of place London forgets about. But it stood within a stone's throw of P Place, a respectable street, and the rent only £25 a year. I signed the lease without hesitation. The furniture from Hampshire, boxed, wrapped, waiting in storage all this time, would fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for exactly this. October 1st. I am here now. The building sits at the end of a cul-de-sac, a dead end in the truest sense. The alley leading to it is clean enough, well paved, flanked by the blank backs of large institutional buildings, silent, indifferent, watching nothing. There is a stable somewhere nearby. You can smell it before you see it. My building carries a name, Chambers. They've given it that title, whoever they are, as if a name alone could lend the old thing some authority. I look at it sometimes and think, one day the pride of that name will be too much for these walls, and the whole thing will simply come apart. Inside, the sitting-room floor rolls beneath your feet, gentle valleys, low hills, like the memory of ground that used to be something else. The top of the door has drifted away from the ceiling, a slow, graceful separation, decades in the making. They must have argued, the door and the ceiling, 50 years ago at least, and they have been pulling away from each other ever since. October 2nd. She appeared without announcement. My landlady. Old, thin, her face the color of something left too long in a closed room, faded, powdered with a fine, invisible dust. She spoke rarely, and when she did, each word seemed to cost her something she couldn't afford. Perhaps her lungs, too, were slowly filling, silting up, like an old house does. She kept my rooms clean, I'll grant her that. A strong girl came each morning, brought up the breakfast, coaxed the fire into life, then disappeared. But the landlady herself moved through the space like something half absent, present only in outline. I asked pleasantly about the other tenants. She told me, without looking at me, that there were none. I was the only one in the building. My rooms had sat empty for years. There had been other gentlemen, she said, upstairs, but they had left. She offered nothing more, and she never once met my eyes. Her gaze, dim, unfocused, would settle somewhere around the middle button of my waistcoat, fixed, unmoving, until I found myself glancing down, wondering if the button was crooked or wrong, or simply not what it should be. October 8th. The accounts for the week. Milk and sugar, bread, butter, marmalade, eggs, the laundress, oil, attendance, 12 shillings and 2pence. Reasonable, tidy, everything in its place. On paper, at least. The son. She mentioned him once, almost in passing. Her son. He works on an omnibus. Some think on a homnibus, in her exact words, swallowed consonants and all. He visits occasionally. I have never seen his face clearly, but I have heard him, Everyone within 3 floors has heard him. He arrives without warning at hours that suit no one but himself. His voice carries through the walls the way damp does, slow, inevitable, everywhere at once. Furniture scrapes, something falls, then silence until the next time. I suspect he drinks. I have no proof, only the noise. The work. Mornings belong to the desk. I write articles, functional, forgettable, the kind that pay the gas bill. I write verses for the comic papers, which require a lightness of touch I sometimes have to manufacture. I write a children's book, where the mind is allowed to run without a leash, which is its own kind of relief. And then there are the others. A novel. 3 years in. I don't speak about it carelessly. It carries a weight that other projects don't. Somewhere beneath the drafts and the crossings out, I still believe in it. A second book, quieter and stranger, a ledger of the self, honest to the point of discomfort. It will take as long as my life takes, because that is precisely what it records, the slow, uneven contest between who I am and who I intended to be. And then the poems. Those I keep privately, like a pressure valve on a pipe that would otherwise burst. I expect nothing from them. I ask nothing of them. That, I think, is why they work. Between all of it, there is never quite enough hours. In the afternoons, I walk. Regent's Park, Kensington Gardens, Hampstead Heath when the mood demands distance, fresh air as medicine, motion as discipline. The city at eye level looks almost manageable. October 10th. It started with an egg. 2 eggs for breakfast, as usual. I was reading the paper when I noticed, the smell first, then the certainty. I rang for Emily without looking up. Eggs bad. Oh, is it, sir? I'll get another one. She took it away. 5 minutes. A new egg arrived on the table, and she left. I looked down. The bad egg, green at the edges, yellowish, distinctly wrong, was sitting in the slop basin, and the good egg was gone. I rang again. You've taken the wrong egg. She blinked. I thought the one I took down didn't smell so very bad. It was trivial, entirely, completely trivial, and yet the egg had set the tone for something I couldn't name, and the day obeyed it faithfully. The article I wrote was flat. I tore it up. A headache gathered behind my eyes and stayed. The words I used, under my breath, were not the kind I'd put in print. I gave up, put on my coat, and walked. Dinner at a cheap chop house on the way back, the kind of place that asks no questions and expects no conversation. I was grateful for it. I reached home near 9. The rain had just begun. Not heavily, not yet, just the first quiet agreement between the clouds and the street. But the wind underneath it carried a different intention entirely. I felt it before I turned into the alley. The alley itself looked altered in the dark. The same stones, the same walls, but drained of whatever ordinary quality they had by daylight. Dismal, long, the kind of passage you walk faster through without deciding to. The hall was cold in a way that felt deliberate. Not the cold of poor insulation or an unlit fire, something stiller than that. I moved through it quickly and climbed to my rooms. Inside was no better. The drafts came from everywhere, not from one window, not from one gap in the plaster, from all of them, simultaneously. They met in the center of the room and did something drafts shouldn't do. They circled. Cold eddies, invisible currents turning slowly in the air, the kind you feel against your scalp before you understand what you're feeling. I stuffed the window sashes with neckties, with odd socks, with whatever came to hand. Then I sat as close to the fire as the smoke would allow, which was not very close at all. I tried to write. My hand touched the paper and stopped. The cold had reached the fingers, past the skin, past the knuckle, down into something deeper. The pen felt foreign. I sat there, in the smoke and the chill, listening to the wind find new ways in. This was the first stormy night. I found myself wondering, not for any particular reason, about the other gentlemen, the ones who had lived upstairs, the ones who had left.
The wind's game. It had a personality, the wind. That was the unsettling part. It came charging up the alley, that dead, forgotten alley, with the sound of a crowd in a hurry. Dozens of feet all at once, rushing toward the door and then stopping. All of them, simultaneously. Silence. I sat very still. I had the distinct, irrational sense of people arranged just outside, standing, looking up at my windows with an interest I hadn't invited and couldn't explain. Then they ran, all at once, a burst of retreat, laughter trailing behind them down the lane, whispering fading into the dark, gone, until the next gust brought them back. It happened again and again. The same arrival, the same sudden halt, the same retreat dissolving into something that sounded just barely like amusement. On the far side of the room, a small, square window opened onto a shaft, 6 feet across, dropping straight down between buildings like a stone throat. The wind found that too. It fell down the funnel and did things wind shouldn't do in enclosed spaces. It puffed, it moaned, it shouted. Sounds with weight and intention, sounds I had no prior reference for. I sat between them both, coat pulled tight, fire at my knees. The chimney boomed low and steady overhead, like a hull in open water. The floor, with its hills and valleys, almost seemed to shift. Almost. I told myself, almost. October 12th. I wish I were not so lonely. And yet, I do not entirely wish it. The loneliness has taught me things comfort never could. On a night like last night, the wind becomes genuine company. The rain has a rhythm you can almost follow. Poverty, too, has its quiet gifts. It keeps the liver honest and saves a man from the particular humiliation of chasing after people who would not notice him anyway. Ill-dressed men are not received as attendants. I learned that early enough. My parents are gone. My sister, she is not dead. That would be simpler in some ways. She married wealth, married movement. Her husband travels looking for health he can't seem to hold on to. She travels losing herself, which appears to be going better. Through years of deliberate silence, she passed out of my life so gradually I barely noticed the door closing. Until Christmas. 5 years of nothing, and then a check, £50, signed not in her hand, but in his, her husband's signature, on what was meant to feel like generosity. I returned it, torn into pieces, 1,000 of them, give or take, sealed in an unstamped envelope, which meant the cost of receiving my reply would land on her. A small satisfaction, perhaps the only one available to me. Her response came written in a broad, sweeping hand, the kind that uses a whole page to say almost nothing. 3 lines. You are evidently as cracked as ever, and rude in the bargain. She knew exactly what she was doing with that word. Cracked. It had been my private terror for as long as I could remember. The fear that whatever lived in my father's family, that particular darkness, might have skipped a generation, only to surface quietly in me. I had never spoken it aloud, but she knew, she had always known, and she placed it precisely, like a blade set down on a table rather than raised. After that, the door did not close. It slammed. I heard it, felt it, somewhere inside the chest, the way you feel a door slam in an empty house. And in the silence that followed, I became aware of things falling from the walls. Small things, fragile things, objects with the kind of particular, irreplaceable value that has nothing to do with money. The sort accumulated slowly, over years, in the specific way that only certain relationships can accumulate them. Rare, some of it, the kind that only needed dusting. It lay in pieces now, across the floor of somewhere I no longer had a name for.
The mirrors. The walls had held mirrors once. Not decorative mirrors, not the kind you check yourself in before leaving a room. These were different, deeper somehow, the way old glass sometimes is. And in them, if the light was right and the hour was quiet enough, I used to see things. Lawns, soft with morning mist, the particular green of childhood summers that no adult landscape ever quite reproduces. Daisy chains, blossom torn from the orchard trees by warm rain and scattered without ceremony across the wet ground. A cave we'd made of the long garden walk, very serious, very secret. Apples hidden in the hayloft, the smell of them, sweet and just beginning to turn. She was there, in all of it, my constant, my other half of every memory. But when that door slammed, really slammed, something happened to the mirrors. A crack ran through each one, clean across the length of the glass, and everything they'd been holding simply left. The lawns, the blossoms, the cave, the apples, all of it went with the crack. I don't look for those things anymore. They aren't there. Now I am alone, completely. At 40, you understand something you couldn't have accepted at 25. Friendship is a structure, and structures take years to build correctly. The kind worth having cannot be rushed into existence, and every other kind, the convenient kind, the proximity kind, is a different thing entirely, whatever name you give it. October 14. The bedroom, 10 feet by 10 feet. A step down from the sitting room, as though the building itself drew a small distinction between work and rest. Both rooms go quiet on still nights, genuinely quiet, the kind of quiet that has texture. The alley carries no traffic. It leads to nowhere anyone needs to go. Except the cats. They arrive after dark, every night, without arrangement, or perhaps with arrangement I am not privy to. They claim the long ledge of a blind window on the opposite building, a window that looks at nothing, opens to nothing, belongs to no visible room. The postman comes at 9:30, and then the alley is theirs. No other footstep disturbs them, only mine. And sometimes, uneven, unpredictable, the footfall of the son who is something on a omnibus. October 15. I came home at 10. Poached eggs and coffee at an ABC shop, then a slow circuit of the outer edge of Regent's Park. The sky was the particular blue-black of a cold, clear October night, and the stars sat in it like chips of ice, brilliant, sharp, offering nothing warm. I turned into the alley and stopped. 13 cats. I counted them without meaning to, all dark-colored, all pressed against the shelter of the walls, watching the single point of my arrival with the collective patience of creatures that have no concept of embarrassment about staring. Not one of them moved, not one of them looked away. Something happened to me under all those eyes, something small and difficult to name, a kind of shyness of all things, as though I were the one who had intruded. I reached the door and fumbled for the latchkey. They moved then, not running, nothing so undignified. They descended from their places without a sound and came to me, pressing softly and deliberately against my legs, all of them, as though they had been expecting me,
as though the door I was about to open was a door they had business with too. I slammed it in their faces, took the stairs faster than I meant to. The front room was cold in a way that stopped me just inside the threshold, a cold that went beyond the temperature, beyond a fire gone out or a window badly sealed. It had weight to it, and the air held something I couldn't immediately place. Damp. Unusual damp. I found the matches. I didn't look at the corners of the room. October 17. Several days of difficult work, an article with no room in it for imagination, the kind of writing that requires the mind to stay flat, stay controlled, stay on the track laid out for it, which is, I admit, not the worst thing for me. My imagination is not a faculty I trust without supervision. When I give it full range, when I stop watching it, it goes places I cannot follow back from easily, beyond ordinary darkness, beyond what I can call metaphor, places I have no comfortable words for, above the stars and underneath the floor of everything I know to be solid. I am aware of the danger, more aware than anyone who has felt it could understand. But why write that here? There is no one to read it, no one to know, no one to bring anything back from. And there is something else I should write, though I am less certain how. For some days now, quietly, at the edges of thought, my mind has been turning towards strange things, medicines, specific drugs I have no professional reason to know, treatments for illnesses I could not describe in any language I possess. I find myself thinking about them in detail with an interest I cannot trace to any source. I do not know where these thoughts are coming from. I'm not sure I want to.
The reading room. The weather had closed in entirely. No walks, no parks, no air that didn't taste of rain before you'd taken 2 steps into it. My afternoons, which had once belonged to Regent's Park and the long restorative miles of Hampstead Heath, now belonged to the British Museum, its vast domed reading room, its orderly silence, its rows of scholars bent over things long dead. I sat among them every day with my reader's ticket, and the thoughts continued. The same ones, medicines, treatments, the particular pharmacology of conditions I had never encountered, never studied, never had any reason to pursue. They moved through my mind with the confidence of things that had always lived there, as though I were not discovering them, but remembering them. I told no one. There was no one to tell. Then, one night, I lay still in the dark and heard something move. Across the floor of the sitting room, over its hills and valleys, deliberate and unhurried, came the sound of small feet, running, stopping, running again. The rats had found the place before I had, apparently. They knew its geography better than I did. My sleep after that became a different kind of thing entirely. October 19. The boy appeared on a dry morning. He belonged to Mrs. Monson, her son's child, most likely. He played in the alley below, which was the only outdoor space the building offered him, and he dragged behind him a small wooden cart. One of its wheels was missing. The remaining 3 scraped and clattered over the cobblestones with the specific, rhythmic persistence of a sound designed to prevent thought. I held out as long as I could. Then I rang for Emily. "Emily, would you ask the little fellow to keep the noise down? I can't work." She went. The child was called inside through the kitchen door. Silence. I felt immediately like a man who had just taken something from someone who had very little. A small, unpleasant feeling. I pushed it aside and returned to the desk. 3 minutes, perhaps 4. Then the scraping, the rattling, the 3-wheeled cart returning to the cobbles with renewed commitment, as though the brief interruption had only clarified its purpose. I rang again, this time with less patience and more precision. That noise must stop.
I cannot write. It stopped, for that day at least. October 23. 7 days. Every morning, without exception, the cart, the cobblestones, the three-wheeled, deliberate, systematic destruction of any sustained thought. I had begun to hear it in the pauses between other sounds. I had begun to dream its rhythm. 7 mornings, 7 rings of the bell, 7 temporary silences. On the last occasion, Mrs. Monson came herself. She was sorry, she said, for the disturbance. It would not happen again. Then, in what was for her an almost unprecedented extended speech, she asked if I was comfortable, how I found the rooms. I answered with care. I raised the matter of the rats. She said they were mice. I mentioned the drafts. She agreed it was, yes, a drafty house. I brought up the cats, their nightly gathering, their numbers, their unblinking assembly in the alley below my window. She considered this for a moment with the unhurried calm of someone who has long since made her peace with a thing. They had been there, she said, as long as she could remember. She offered nothing further on the subject. Neither did I.
The Last Gentleman. She saved it for the end, the way people sometimes do with the thing that matters most. The house, she said, was over 200 years old, and the last gentleman to occupy my rooms, had been a painter, a serious one, apparently. He had hung the walls with Jimmy Bueys and Raffles, she said, with the quiet pride of someone citing names she had carried carefully for years without quite knowing what they meant. It took me a moment. Cimabue, Raphael. I said nothing to correct her. Some things are better left in the form they've been given. October 24. He came in late. The son, the one who is somethink on a omnibus. I was already in bed when I heard it begin. Voices rising through the kitchen floor, loud and angular with whatever the evening had put in him. An argument with no visible shape from where I lay, just the heat of it, the back and forth of two people in a room that was too small for what they were saying. Then a sentence rose above the rest, distinct, fully formed. Burning from top to bottom is the only thing that'll ever make this house right. I lay still for a moment. Then I knocked on the floor. The voices stopped, immediately, completely, as though a switch had been thrown. Silence so complete it had its own weight. I slept eventually, but the voices came back in the dreams, still arguing, still going. The quiet. These rooms are, at their calmest, almost too quiet. On windless nights the silence is total, not peaceful silence, not restful silence, but the silence of a place that has removed itself from everything living. The city exists somewhere. You know this intellectually. Occasionally, through walls and distance, you feel it more than hear it, a low, slow vibration in the air, as though London is breathing somewhere below the floor. Sometimes it has a tone to it, a note underneath the vibration, something that sounds in the small hours less like traffic and more like an approaching mass of something, an army just beyond the horizon, or a wave so large you cannot yet see it, only hear what it is doing to the water ahead of it. I do not dwell on this, I simply note it. October 27. I have begun to watch what she moves. Mrs. Munson. The dusting,
She uses it as an opportunity to rearrange everything within reach, and the rearrangements follow a logic I cannot penetrate. The ashtrays leave the writing table and appear on the mantelpiece in a row that suggests something ceremonial. The pen tray vanishes from beside the inkstand and resurfaces buried among the books on the reading desk, as though she believes pens belong near reading and not near writing. The gloves, every single morning, are transferred to the bookshelf and arranged there with genuine care, as though that is simply where gloves go. I move them back to the low table by the door. The following morning, they are on the bookshelf again. The tablecloth, the old one from Trinity Hall, she lays across the table with a slight rotation, just enough that when I look at it, something in my body wants to reach up and straighten my collar, my tie, my clothes, an unease with no object, looking for one. I watch her move through the room, and I feel a pressure building behind the sternum, meek, silent, methodical, her watery eyes fixed on surfaces rather than people, her colorless lips arranged in an expression that does not quite become a smile and does not quite become anything else. I had a thought the other morning that alarmed me. I considered the inkstand, its weight, the distance between the desk and where she was standing. I set the thought down immediately. I am recording it here only because I believe in honest record-keeping and because it disturbed me enough to warrant examination. I do not think or speak in that register. I have never been a man who does. Those words, that impulse, arrived in my mind the way a voice arrives from another room, present before I had summoned it, spoken before I had formed it, as though someone had leaned close and said it into my ear. October 30. 1 month. I have been in these rooms exactly 1 month, and I can say with some confidence now, the place does not agree with me. The headaches have changed. They began as interruptions, manageable, occasional, the kind that yield to an open window and an hour of stillness. They are something else now, more frequent, more specific in their location, more interested in staying. My nerves are in a condition I do not have a clean word for. I sit at the desk where I have always sat and worked. I write what I have always written. The shape of the days has not changed, and yet something underneath all of it has shifted, quietly, incrementally, the way a floor shifts over decades, until one day you notice it is no longer level and cannot remember when it stopped being so. I think about that painter sometimes, the one who hung Cimabue and Raphael on these walls, and then presumably left. I think about the other gentlemen too, the ones upstairs, the ones who had left. Mrs. Munson never said why. I have not asked.
The mutual dislike. It is official now, I think. Whatever pretense existed between Mrs. Monson and myself, the thin, professional courtesy of landlady and tenant, has quietly dissolved. I dislike her. I am quite certain she dislikes me. Neither of us has said so. Neither of us needs to. And yet it is more than dislike that unsettles me. It is the feeling, persistent, shapeless, returning at odd hours, that things are happening in this house that I am not meant to know about. Small arrangements, quiet understandings, doors that were open yesterday, closed today.
a quality of careful management in how she moves through rooms when I am present, as though she is editing something in real time. I cannot point to a single fact, I only know the feeling, and the feeling does not leave. The sun. He stayed the night. I heard him settle in, or rather I heard the building settle around the fact of him, the way old structures absorb presence differently depending on who is doing the living in them. In the morning, I was at the window when he came out. He looked up, our eyes met, or rather his found mine with an ease that suggested he already knew where to look. What I saw, a broad, heavy figure, a face that arranged itself into an expression I can only call a leer, though I admit immediately that my nerves are not in a condition to be trusted with faces. It lasted a second. He moved on. I stayed at the window longer than I needed to. Evidently, I am becoming absurdly sensitive. I know this. I say it to myself plainly, in daylight, at the desk, with a clear head. Disordered nerves manufacture significance from nothing. A man glances up. He squints against the light. I read it as something directed at me specifically and personally. This is what unwell looks like from the inside. I recognize it. I simply cannot seem to stop it. The reading room again. This afternoon at the British Museum, I became aware of being watched. Not once, continuously. Every time I raised my eyes from the page, I found other eyes already there, waiting, patient, fixed on me from various points around the long readers' table. Scholars, researchers, people with their own books, their own purposes, their own reasons to be in that room, and none whatsoever to spend those reasons on me. And yet, I left before my usual hour. At the door, I turned back, just once, a last look across the room. Every head at the table was facing in my direction. I know what this means. I know the clinical shape of it, the way it arrives when the mind has been worn to a certain thinness. I have read enough to understand what I am describing. I walked home telling myself this, firmly, repeatedly, the way you apply pressure to a wound. I must take more exercise. My body has been still too long, and a still body gives the mind too much room. November 2nd. The silence has changed. It was manageable before, even something I could call peaceful on the right kind of evening. Now it presses. It has developed a quality that emptiness shouldn't have, a weight that comes not from what is present, but from what refuses to be. No footsteps overhead, not once, not ever. Those upper rooms sit above me each night and produce nothing, no creak of a board, no shifting of weight, no human signal of any kind. I find myself listening for them, which is worse than not listening, because the absence then becomes active, deliberate. I have begun to think about going up. I haven't, but the thought arrives each evening with slightly more insistence than the evening before, and I am noting it here because honest record-keeping requires it. The fog has arrived. It came without announcement, the way it always does. One morning the city is simply reduced, narrowed, its distances abolished. I worked by lamplight all morning. The alley below was barely visible, and the house, end-stopped in its dead-end lane, was quieter than I have ever known it. No cart today. I realized I was listening for it, and then, stranger still, that I missed it. the broken, scraping, three-wheeled rhythm I had rung the bell to silence a dozen times. This morning, in the fog and lamplight, I think I would have let it go on. It is, after all, a human sound, and this house, at its particular end of its particular alley, makes other sounds, sounds without clear source, sounds I have not been able to account for, and therefore not written down, until now. The mirrors. I caught myself at the long, cracked mirrors this afternoon, standing before them, looking for what I knew I would not find, the orchard, the light through trees, the particular green of those summers. I stood there longer than I should have, long enough to feel foolish, long enough to feel something else too. The mirrors gave back only shadow, not my reflection, not the room behind me, shadow, as though it had moved in and taken up residence in the glass when I wasn't watching and had no intention of leaving. I stepped back. I did not look again.
10 p.m. I am writing this now, at this hour, because the alternative is to sit and simply listen. 2 sounds, only 2. The distant murmur of the city, that low, perpetual vibration, neither near nor fully gone, and underneath it, or perhaps woven through it, the wind, slow tonight, tired. The 2 sounds move toward each other in the dark and become one thing, something that is neither traffic nor wind, but both at once, a sound the city makes when it has stopped pretending to be only a city. Then a cat cries out, somewhere below the window, sharp, sudden, uncanny in the way that only a cat in darkness is uncanny, as though it has seen something and chosen sound over silence to respond to it. The cats are always there when the light goes. I have stopped being surprised by their number. I have not stopped being unsettled by it. The wind is finding the funnel again, dropping into that shaft between buildings and doing what it does there, something between a rush and a sweep, something that carries the suggestion, if you are in the right state of mind, of very large wings moving very fast across a great distance. I feel lost tonight, not misplaced, not merely alone, forgotten. November 3. I can see the door from my window, not fully, but enough. A hat brim, a shoulder, a hand reaching for the bell, that much. In 2 months, 2 people have come to see me. I watched them both arrive before I heard their voices asking for me below. I remember the specific quality of each voice, the particular way each carried upward. Neither of them came back. I have been turning this over without meaning to, looking for the ordinary explanation, the one that makes the most sense and requires the least of me. People are busy. The building is difficult to find. The alley discourages. I leave it there, in that explanation, and I do not press further. The article. I finished it, read it through, beginning to end in one sitting, and then I sat with it for a long time before I did anything else. There were passages I did not recognize, not stylistically, not merely turns of phrase I wouldn't have chosen, thoughts, complete developed thoughts, ideas arranged with an internal logic I could follow but had no memory of constructing. I turned back to the earlier pages, my handwriting throughout, my pen presumably, my hours at that desk certainly. Where else would it have been written? And yet, I drew my pencil through most of it. There was nothing else to do. I cannot send out work that carries in its body ideas I cannot vouch for, expressions I cannot explain, a mind I do not fully recognize looking back at me from my own pages. Can the memory begin to fail this quietly, this selectively? I do not know. I find that I would rather not know. The pens. They are never where I left them. Every day, without exception, she moves them, Mrs. Monson or Emily or whatever arrangement exists between them in the geography of this house that I am not privy to. I have spoken to Mrs. Monson. She says she will speak to Emily. I speak to Emily. She says she will tell Mrs. Monson. The circle completes itself, and the next morning the pens are somewhere new. I wrote something just now that I need to record, because the record must be honest, and because I am becoming genuinely frightened of certain thoughts that are arriving in this room. I wrote here in this diary moments ago that I should like to drive the pens into them and turn them out blind into the alley for the cats. I am looking at those words. They are in my hand, my specific, recognizable, unambiguous handwriting, and I have no sense of having chosen them. They came fully formed, moving through the pen before I had decided anything, the way a voice you didn't expect can be halfway through a sentence before you register it as sound. I felt I had to write it, as though declining to do so was not available to me. This is what I mean when I say I am frightened. Not of Mrs. Monson, not of the cats, or the drafts, or the sounds the funnel makes at night. Of this, of the distance, narrow but real and growing, between what I think and what arrives at the end of my pen. I must exercise. I must be deliberate. I must hold myself to myself. I must. November 4. A lecture in the French Quarter. Death, the subject announced plainly on the bill, without softening. I went, I think, because going anywhere felt necessary, because the alternative was another evening in these rooms with only the wind and the cats and my own handwriting for company. The room was overheated. I was more tired than I had admitted to myself. I slept for most of it. But one passage reached me before sleep did, and it has not left. The lecturer, speaking of suicides, said that self-destruction is not an escape, not a door. Those who take that route, he argued, do not leave. They simply put the work down without finishing it, and are made to return, to pick it up exactly where they dropped it, with the full weight of what they did to themselves added to whatever they were already carrying. They cannot shirk their responsibilities so easily. I have been sitting with that sentence since I came home. Not because I am in such a mind, I want to be clear about that here, in the honest record, but because something in the room, or in me, made it land differently than it should have, with a weight it should not have had, as though something somewhere already knew.
They wander, not in peace, not in rest, in something far worse, a kind of endless, formless suffering that has no name in any living language. Stripped of their bodies, stripped of everything, they drift, searching, always searching, for a way back in. They find it in the broken ones, the ones whose minds have cracked just enough to leave a door open, the weak, the lost, the ones who can't fight back. They slip inside like smoke through a keyhole, and the person who was there simply isn't anymore. I shouldn't have listened. I knew it even then. My mind doesn't need this kind of fuel. It burns too easily on its own. I walked home alone. Greek Street stretched ahead of me,
slick and quiet, and somewhere between one step and the next, the century folded. 100 years collapsed like paper, and he was there, De Quincey. I could almost see him, pale, slight, haunting these same stones, whispering to his drug like it was a god, just, subtle, and mighty. His dreams didn't stay in the past where they belonged. They followed me. I saw him curled in that hollow, freezing mansion, no fire, no warmth, just shadows and a small, frightened girl who had nowhere else to go. Two lost things huddled under a single cloak, listening to a house that breathed. I saw him walking beside Anne, that ghost of a girl, through streets that no longer exist, and then the corner of Great Titchfield Street, the place he returned to again and again, the rendezvous she never kept. She never came. I don't know why that particular thought hit so hard, but something in my chest pulled tight and I couldn't shake it. The image of a young man standing at a street corner, waiting, still waiting. The kind of grief that doesn't announce itself. It just settles quietly, like dust on everything. I looked up. The alley was dark, but one window burned, top floor. A shadow moved across the blind, head, shoulders, exaggerated by the angle of the light into something larger than it should have been. I watched it for a moment, then walked on. The 5th of November came in yellow and thick. Fog pressed against the windows like something trying to get in. I was at my desk, writing, or trying to, when I heard them. Footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate, each one finding the creak. A knock at my door, careful, almost hesitant. "Come in." Silence. I waited, then louder. "Come in." Nothing. No handle turning, no voice, just the particular silence of someone standing very still on the other side of a door. I muttered something sharp under my breath and turned back to the page. But the words were gone, completely gone. Whatever had been flowing through me moments before had simply stopped, dried up at the source, as if someone had reached in and closed a valve. The fog outside pressed yellower, heavier. I pushed back from the desk, crossed the room, and pulled the door open myself. "What do you want? Why won't you just—" The words dissolved. The landing was empty. No one, nothing, just the staircase descending into deep, slow coils of yellow fog that moved like something alive, rising, curling, filling the silence with a texture that felt almost deliberate. I stood in the doorway for a long moment. The fog kept moving. I did not. I shut the door hard, harder than I needed to. The sound of it filled the room and then died, and I stood there for a moment with my hand still on the handle, jaw tight, telling myself it was nothing. Old houses make sounds. Wood settles. Pipes breathe. I went back to my desk. Emily came in a few minutes later, a letter in her hand, eyes down. I watched her set it on the table before I spoke. "Were you outside my door just now? You or Mrs. Monson?" "No, sir." "You're certain?" She looked up. Something moved behind her eyes, quick, like a fish turning in dark water. "Mrs. Monson's at market, sir. It's only me and the child in the whole house. I've been at the dishes this past hour." I noticed the color in her face, or rather, the absence of it. She was already edging toward the door, one shoulder angled back, as if part of her had already left the room. "Stay a moment, Emily." I told her what I'd heard, all of it. The footsteps on the stairs, the careful knock, the silence where a person should have been.
She stood very still while I spoke. Her eyes didn't stay on me. They drifted slowly from corner to corner of the room, as though she were checking for something I couldn't see. "Who was it?" I asked. She recited it like a line she'd been made to memorize. "Mrs. Monson says it's only mice." Mice. The word came out flat. No, someone was at that door. Someone was standing right outside it. Is the sun in the house? And then something shifted. The evasiveness dropped away, suddenly, completely, like a mask falls when the face beneath it can no longer hold the weight. She looked at me directly for the first time. "There's no one, sir. No one at all but you and me and the child. There couldn't have been anyone at your door." A breath. As for the knocks, she stopped, caught herself. "What about the knocks?" The silence stretched. She looked at the floor. "The knocks isn't mice, sir, nor the footsteps neither. But then, nothing. Is something wrong with this house?" Her head came up, fast, too fast. "Lord, no, the drains are perfectly—" "Not the drains." I kept my voice low, careful. "Did something happen here? Something bad?" The color rose in her face all the way to her hairline, and then drained out again just as fast, leaving her pale and blinking. She was caught between two fears, the fear of telling me, and something older, something deeper, the fear of what it meant that she knew. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, and then her eyes found mine, frightened and wide, and she began, haltingly, barely above a whisper, to say something about a gentleman who lived upstairs, something that had happened to him once. "Emily!" The voice came from below, sharp, sudden, like a blade dropped on stone. The girl flinched as if struck. She didn't walk to the door. She fell toward it, stumbled through it, disappeared down the stairs as if something had grabbed her by the collar and pulled her back into the dark. The room was quiet again. I sat there, alone, with half a sentence hanging in the air. A gentleman, upstairs, something that happened. I looked at the ceiling and waited for it to tell me the rest.
November 10th. For the first time in weeks, I felt like myself again. The article was done, accepted, another one already commissioned. I slept through the night without waking. I ate, I walked, I breathed cold air and let it clean something out of me that had been sitting too long in the dark. The pills helped, I won't pretend otherwise. I watched the boy playing in the courtyard this afternoon, dragging that little cart back and forth across the stones, and felt nothing but a quiet, uncomplicated warmth. I even thought briefly about going down to join him. The landlady crossed the hall while I was standing there, that gray, hollowed face of hers. I've been impatient with it before. Today, I only felt sorry. She looks like the building looks, worn down to the essential shape of herself, all the softness long since rubbed away. Like a woman who was frightened once, very badly, and has spent every day since then waiting for it to happen again. I spoke to her gently about the pens, the gloves, small things. She raised her eyes to mine, first time she'd done that, and offered the faintest trace of a smile. "I'll try and remember, sir." I wanted to take her by the shoulders and tell her the world wasn't as bad as her face believed it to be. Even the cats. I came home at 11, and they gathered at the door the way they always do, that slow, silent congregation of them, watching. Tonight, it almost seemed like welcome. I crouched down and reached for the nearest one. She moved so fast I didn't see it. The hiss, the strike, a single clean line of red drawn across the back of my hand before I could pull it away. The others scattered into the dark, shrieking as though I were the threat, as though I had done something to them. I stood up, laughed, shook my head. They're waiting for reinforcements, I thought, building their numbers, planning. I was still smiling when I reached the top of the stairs. My room was cold, colder than it should have been. The fire had gone out. I hadn't left it that way, and the darkness had a weight to it, a density that stopped me just inside the door. I moved carefully toward the mantelpiece, hands out, fingers trailing the wall, then the ledge, searching for the matchbox. And then, contact. Something on the ledge. Something that had been resting there in the dark, perfectly still until my fingers found it. It pulled back the instant I touched it. Cold, wet, the unmistakable specific shape of a human hand. The matchbox was right there. I didn't reach for it. I couldn't move at all. The cold moved up through my fingers, into my wrist, into my arm. My skin pulled tight across my bones, every hair, every nerve, all of it screaming the same single wordless thing. There is someone standing next to you. "Who's there?" My voice came out louder than I intended. The darkness didn't answer. The word fell out of me and kept falling. No echo, no answer, just the dark swallowing it whole. But something moved. Across the room, away from me, toward the door. Not fast, not clean, a shuffling, dragging kind of movement, the sound of fabric catching at the edge of a chair, the corner of a table, the sound of something that didn't quite know how to move through a room anymore. And then, the matchbox, right there, under my fingers, as if it had been waiting. I struck the light. The gas flared up and filled every corner in a single cold second. Nothing. No one. The room sat exactly as I'd left it. Every object in its place. The chair, the desk, the curtains hanging perfectly still. I stood in the middle of it all with a burning match and the absolute, unambiguous certainty that someone had just been standing beside me in the dark. I felt my back find the wall before I told it to. I made myself breathe, made myself think. The door. It was open, just slightly. Onto the landing. I crossed the room, candle in hand now, and stepped out. The light stretched down the staircase in a long, pale wedge. I stood at the top and listened. Nothing. Not a creak, not a breath, not a single sound of weight on old wood. I was about to go back inside when I heard it. From above. A sound so faint I almost dismissed it. Almost. It was like a sigh, the kind of sound a house makes when the wind moves through it, but the night outside was absolutely still, the kind of still that has no bottom to it. The sound was not repeated. I stood there for a moment, candle flame burning straight and vertical in the motionless air. Then I started up the stairs. The first landing, one door, locked. I tried the handle once and moved on. The second landing, one door. The handle turned. The room exhaled. That's the only word for it. It exhaled, releasing something that had been sealed inside for a very long time. Cold air, thick with the smell of years, of absence, of a space that had been closed off and left to become whatever closed-off spaces become. And beneath that, something else. I cannot name it. I've tried since, and I still cannot. It wasn't decay, exactly. It wasn't damp or mold or anything I could point to and identify. It was something underneath all of those things, something that bypassed the nose entirely and landed somewhere deeper, somewhere more animal, and made my stomach turn before my mind had even begun to process it. I held the candle up and made myself look. Small room, square.
the ceiling sloping down with the roof pressed in, 2 tiny windows black with night. No carpet, no furniture, not a single object to suggest that any living person had ever chosen to be here. Just cold, just dark, just that smell. I moved the candle slowly around the edges of the room, checked the corners, checked for doors within the door, recesses, anywhere a person could fold themselves into the shadow and wait. Nothing. Only the cold, which was the kind of cold that doesn't come from an open window or a dead fire, the kind that lives in a place, that has taken up residence there and made itself permanent. I pulled the door shut, stood on the landing for 1 moment longer than I needed, then went downstairs, got into bed, and lay in the dark with my eyes open, listening to a house that had decided, for now, to say nothing more.
I told myself I'd been wrong. That's the easiest thing in the morning, to fold the night up small and put it somewhere you don't have to look at it. I'd been tired, unsettled. The cold plays tricks. Old houses make sounds that travel in ways you can't predict or explain. I'd been wrong, that was all. But then I slept, and in the sleep, they came in on all fours. The landlady first, then another figure behind her, dark, indistinct, the kind of shape that exists in dreams precisely because your mind refuses to finish it. After them, the cats, dozens of them, filling the doorway, filling the room, their eyes catching no light because there was no light to catch. I was in the bed. I couldn't move. What happened next I will not dwell on, only that when it was over, they carried me upstairs, through the dark, up past the locked door, up to the second landing, up to that small square room with the sloped ceiling and the 2 black windows, and the smell that had no name. They laid me on the floor and left me there. I woke up with my heart going like a fist against a wall, lay still for a long time, watched the ceiling until the light came. November 11th. Emily has not come back. Mrs. Monson moves through my rooms now like weather, inevitable, impersonal, impossible to stop. She does everything in precisely the way most designed to irritate without ever doing anything actually wrong. The pens moved, the curtain left half-drawn, the tea brought at the wrong temperature, at the wrong time, with that gray face that reveals absolutely nothing. Small things. I know they're small things, but small things repeated often enough stop being small. November 12th. I woke early and went through to the front room for a book. The fire hadn't been lit yet, and a girl was crouched at the grate, her back to me. "Good morning. Make it a good one. It's bitter today." She turned. Wrong face. I stood there very still for a moment, the way you do when the world has shifted by 1 degree and you're trying to work out whether you imagined it. "Where's Emily?" The girl looked at me with the flat, guarded expression of someone who has already been told not to say too much. "You mean the one before me? She left?" "I started on the 6th. She was already gone by then." I took my book, went back to bed, lay there with the pages open and the words meaning nothing. The 6th, the day after our conversation, the unfinished one, the one where she'd begun to tell me something about a gentleman upstairs, and a voice from below had pulled her away like a hook through water. 1 day. They waited 1 day. That kind of speed doesn't come from coincidence. It comes from urgency, from someone who needed a particular door closed before it opened any further. I kept reading the same line over and over until it was time to get up. November 13th. The scratch on my hand is worse. It should have closed by now. Instead, it has swollen along its length, gone tight and hot and insistent in the way that wounds go when the body is losing the argument. I cleaned it again,
opened it slightly with a sterilized blade and let it breathe. It throbs at night, when everything else is quiet. I've heard stories about cat wounds, about what they carry in their claws without knowing it, about how they fester slowly, quietly from the inside, long before there's anything to see on the surface.
November 14th. And yet, I love this house. I know how that sounds. I know what this house has done to my sleep, my nerves, my hand. I know the cats outside hate me, and something inside the walls moves at night. I know the rent is cheaper than it has any right to be, and I know I never asked why. Some questions are worse than the silence they'd break. It is quiet here, genuinely, deeply quiet, the kind you almost never find in the middle of a city that never stops moving. I can work here, I can think here, and I find, against all reasonable judgment, that I want to stay. I shall renew the lease, year after year, until one of us gives out. Looking at the walls, I suspect it won't be me. November 16th. I found my clothes on the floor this morning, all of them, scattered across the room as if they'd been pulled from the chair and examined. My coat and waistcoat in particular arranged in a way that made something cold move through me before I'd fully woken, like someone had tried them on, like someone had stood in the dark in my room and held my things against themselves and found them wanting. The chair was overturned beside the bed. I had dreamed again. A figure, always with its hands pressed flat against its face, hiding something or holding something in, moving toward me through the dark, its voice coming out broken and raw. Where can I find covering? Oh, who will clothe me? Over and over, getting closer each time. I told myself it was sleepwalking. I have done it before. Woke once on the cold pavement of Earl's Court Road with no memory of the stairs, the door, the street. I thought that was behind me. Apparently not. Tonight I will tie my ankle to the bedpost. The old method. Undignified but effective. I hope. November 17th. The knot held. My foot was still tethered when I woke, but my clothes were on the floor again. Every piece, distributed across the room with a kind of deliberateness that sleepwalking, my sleepwalking, has never had before. My trousers had made it as far as the doorway into the front room, one leg trailing over the step as if dragged or dropped mid-journey. And the dreams. All night, a figure moving, back and forth across the room, into the front room, back again, coming to stand at the side of the bed and look down at me, not with menace exactly, but with an intensity that was somehow worse, pure, focused attention, the kind of looking that doesn't blink. I never fully woke. I kept surfacing, almost, and then sinking again, back down into that room where the figure stood watching. This morning the headache was back, vicious, behind the eyes, and the smell. Faint, so faint I almost convinced myself it wasn't there, but it was. That same formless, foul thing from the room upstairs, except now it was here, in my room, as if something had brought it down with it on its way through the dark. I'm going to start locking my door. November 26th. A good week. Solid work, clear head, regular hours. I had almost begun to feel that the house and I had reached some kind of understanding. Then I thought about the window. The night of November 4th,
I'd looked up from the alley and seen a light in the top window, a shadow thrown large against the blind, head and shoulders, someone up there. I know now which window that was. It was one of the two small windows in the square room under the roof, the room that has no blind, has never had one. I've checked. There is nothing on those windows, no curtain, no shade, no fabric of any kind, nothing that could have caught a light and thrown a shadow, nothing that could have shown me what I saw.
The snow had come down clean and total. It covered the alley in a sheet of white that no one had touched yet, not a print, not a mark, not a single disturbance from one end to the other. I walked into it with my umbrella angled low against the wind, watching the ground, watching my own feet. Then I saw his legs, just the legs. The umbrella cut off everything above the knee. Dark trousers, a man's stride, 4 feet ahead of me, maybe less, moving in the same direction, toward the same door. I raised the umbrella. Tall, broad, walking with a kind of weight and purpose that felt entirely real. The wind came. I brought the umbrella back down. Seconds, only seconds, and when I raised it again, the alley ahead of me was empty. I stopped walking. The door was closed. The snow between me and it was smooth and white and perfect. I turned and looked back the way I'd come. I walked the whole length of it again, slowly, looking for the place where his feet had been. There was nothing. Only my own trail of prints, leading in, leading back, leading in again. No other marks, anywhere. I went upstairs without stopping, got into bed without lighting the candle, lay there listening to the snow settle on the window ledge in the silence, and tried very hard not to think about what I hadn't found. November 28th. I locked the door, and the dreams stopped. That's all it took. A key turned in a lock, and 3 nights of quiet sleep followed, clean and dreamless and ordinary. I told myself the explanation was simple. The security of the locked door had calmed something in my nervous system that had been running too hot for too long. The sleepwalking, the scattered clothes, the half-remembered figures moving through my room, all of it produced by a mind that needed rest and hadn't been getting it. I almost believed that. Then, last night, I woke in the complete dark with the knowledge that someone was outside my door. Not a sound, not a breath, nothing I could point to and name, just a certainty, the kind that arrives fully formed, that doesn't build gradually but simply exists suddenly, the way a smell hits you or a cold draft finds the back of your neck. Someone was standing on the other side of that door, standing still, listening. I lay there for a long moment, not moving, aware of my own breathing in a way that made me want to stop it entirely. Then I got out of bed, crossed the floor in the dark, reached the door, and heard it. From the front room, the other side of the wall, the sound of something moving away, retreating, but not walking, not the clean, even sound of footsteps on floorboards. Something lower than that. A dragging, shuffling, crawling kind of movement. Limbs that moved wrong, weight distributed in a way that didn't match anything upright, anything that moved the way a person moves. Something on its hands and knees, moving away through the dark, getting quieter. Then, nothing. I stood at the locked door with my hand on the key and did not turn it. For a very long time, I did not turn it. I turned the key. One motion, door open, through. And I felt it. Not heard, not saw, felt it. The way the air in a room holds the shape of whoever just left. A warmth that hasn't finished fading, a pressure on the atmosphere, a vibration so fine it existed somewhere below the threshold of sound. Someone had been standing exactly where I was standing 1 second ago. He was behind the next door now, the passage door. I could feel him there the same way, that concentrated, deliberate presence pressing through the wood like heat through glass. I crossed the room fast, turned the handle. Cold air hit me like a wall. Not the ordinary cold of a house at night, something moving, something that had just moved, rushing past me through the open door as if escaping or as if I had interrupted something that wasn't finished yet. The passage was empty. The landing beyond it, empty. The staircase going down, nothing. No shape, no sound, no retreating footsteps on the wood. But he hadn't had time to go far. I knew that, and knowing it was the thing that moved my feet forward when every other part of me was screaming to go back, lock the door, get into bed, pull the covers over my head, and wait for morning like a child. I stepped out onto the landing. The house dropped away below me, that narrow stairwell falling down into pure black, the oilcloth cold as river water under my bare feet. I leaned over the railing and looked down into nothing. Nothing looked back. I don't know what made me look up. There was no sound, no movement in my peripheral vision, no reason at all, just a sudden absolute compulsion, the kind that comes from somewhere older than thought, and I raised my eyes. He was there, halfway up the next turn of the stairs, above me, leaning forward over the balustrade with a stillness that wasn't the stillness of someone caught by surprise. It was the stillness of someone who had been watching for a long time and saw no reason to stop. He was staring directly into my face. The skylight above him threw just enough pale light to cut his silhouette out of the dark, and the silhouette was wrong. The head too large, the shoulders too wide, humped and heavy, rising above the railing in a mass that didn't resolve into anything familiar the longer I looked at it. The hair, if it was hair, fell in a way that suggested something untamed, something that had never been tended or contained. He wasn't standing on the stairs. He was clinging to them. I stood there, and I looked at him, and I could not move, could not speak, could not locate myself in time or space or the ordinary world of locked doors and candles and ink-stained desks. There was only the dark stairwell and the skylight and that vast wrong shape draped over the railing above me, staring down with a face I could not read because the darkness had swallowed every feature, except the fact of its attention. Total, unblinking, ancient, pointed at me like a blade. I knew what I was looking at now. Not a tenant, not a sleepwalker, not any explanation that lived in the ordinary world of causes and effects and things that could be written down in a report. The listener. The one who had been there from the beginning, outside my door, beside my bed, in the cold room upstairs that smelled of something without a name. The one who had been watching me since the first night, patient and absolute and utterly without shame. My forehead was wet, my hands were shaking. I started climbing. He moved the instant I moved, not in panic, in precision, maintaining the exact distance between us, the way a shadow maintains its distance from the thing that casts it. I could hear him ahead of me in the dark, that low, dragging, crawling sound, always the same number of steps ahead, never more, never less. As if he wanted me to follow, as if this had always been where we were going, landing to landing, flight to flight, the house rising around me in the dark, each step colder than the last. When I reached the first landing, he was halfway up the next flight. When I was halfway up the next flight, he had already reached the top. Then I heard the door. The small square room under the roof. I heard him open it and go in. And then, nothing. Complete silence, as if he had walked into that room and ceased to exist, or ceased to move, which in the dark felt like the same thing. I stood at the bottom of the last few stairs, with no light, no weapon, nothing in my hands but the decision to keep moving. I kept moving. The door was half open. I stood in front of it, and the darkness beyond it was not the ordinary darkness of an unlit room. It was the darkness of that room specifically, that cold, that smell, that particular quality of air that had no business existing inside a building where people lived. He was behind the door. I couldn't hear him, couldn't see him, but he was there, standing in his favorite position, pressed into the gap between door and wall, listening like he always listened, with that total and devouring attention. Listening to me hesitate. I almost turned back. I was genuinely, seriously considering it. One step back, then another, then the stairs, then my room, then the locked world of daylight and reason. Something scuttled across the boards behind me. Small, fast, gone. The door moved a quarter inch, closing, and something in me that had been standing very still simply broke open. My foot came up, and I kicked the door hard. It swung back and hit the wall and stayed there, wide open, and I walked forward into the dark beyond it. Bare feet on cold boards, each step loud in the silence. Blood roaring in my ears like a tide coming in. The room swallowing me whole.
I closed the door behind me. The two of us, shut in together, 4 walls, a few feet of darkness between whatever it was and me. I stood very still and waited for my eyes to find something, any shape, any outline, any proof that I was not alone in this room. And then, without warning, something shifted. Not in the room, in me. A light came on behind my eyes, cold and clarifying, the way a fever breaks at 3 a.m, and suddenly everything is just a body in a bed and a window growing gray with early light. I stood there in the dark, and I felt the horror simply drain, like water finding the lowest point. My nerves, of course, my wretched, unreliable, catastrophically vivid nerves, the sleepwalking I thought I'd left in Earl's Court, the dreams that had always been too real, actors who lingered on the stage for minutes after the scene had ended, refusing to dissolve back into sleep where they belonged. A dream figure, that was all. I almost laughed. There was a match in my pocket. I struck it against the wall. The room leaped into existence around me, small, square, bare, cold, empty. Not a shape in any corner, not a shadow that didn't belong to something solid. The match burned down to my fingers, and I let it go. I went back to bed, cursing myself the whole way down. But the moment sleep came back, so did he, creeping in from whatever place dream figures go when the light is on, back to the bedside, that immense head lowering toward me, the mouth finding my ear, the voice coming out in a wet and patient whisper. I want your body. I want its covering. I'm waiting for it. I'm always listening. I woke with those words still in the room, and the smell was there too, stronger than it had ever been, not just upstairs anymore, here in my bedroom, in the air I was breathing, as if it had followed me down the stairs and settled in while I slept. November 30th. I am beginning to understand something I don't want to understand. The nerves, the sleepwalking, the dreams. I've been using these words like a wall, stacking them up between myself and the thing I keep almost seeing. But the wall is getting thinner, and the thought that is pushing through it, slowly, the way light pushes through fog over a June sea. This house has me. Not in any way I can explain to a doctor or write in a letter or say aloud without sounding like a man who needs rest and country air. But it has me. I feel it the way you feel a current in still-looking water, only when you stop swimming and let yourself drift. I am drifting, and the house knows exactly where it wants me to go. November 30th. A letter from Chapter. Old friend. Trinity. Years ago. A different life. He's coming home from the East and wants my address. I sent it without thinking twice. This morning, footsteps in the alley. I don't know why they alarmed me. There was nothing unusual in the sound. Ordinary footsteps, ordinary pace. But something in my chest tightened before my mind had even registered what I was hearing, the way an animal goes still before it knows what it has heard. I went to the window. A man was standing below in the alley, waiting for the door to open. I looked at him for a long moment, and could not have said why the sight of him made the air in the room feel suddenly, imperceptibly, thinner.
He was well dressed. That was the first thing. The particular, deliberate well-dressedness of a man who understands that appearance is a kind of argument. Broad shoulders, a glossy top hat, an overcoat that sat exactly right at the collar. Everything about him said solidity, presence, weight in the world. Then the door opened, and I heard his voice ask for me by name. Something moved through my nervous system that I won't call fear. I don't have a better word, but I won't call it that. I waited for his footsteps on the stairs. They didn't come. A minute passed, then another. The house held its silence the way it always holds its silence, completely, without apology. I opened my door and looked out onto the landing. No one. I crossed to the window that looks the full length of the alley, both directions, the full length of it, empty in the flat, gray morning light. Not a soul anywhere. I went downstairs to the kitchen, all the way down, found the landlady at whatever gray, wordless task she assigns herself to in the mornings, and asked her directly, had a gentleman just called for me, just now, a minute ago? She looked at me with that exhausted face of hers, and offered the faintest ghost of a smile. No. Just that. No elaboration, no curiosity, as if the question didn't surprise her at all. December 1st. I am writing this in full daylight, at my desk, with the sounds of the street coming up through the window, and I am telling myself very firmly that I am a rational man who has been working too hard and sleeping badly, and whose nerves have a long-established history of misbehavior. I am telling myself this because the alternative is to admit that I am now seeing things in broad daylight. Not at midnight, not in the gray territory between sleep and waking. Now, here,
in the ordinary, unremarkable light of December morning. I need Chapter. He'll arrive soon, and he'll sit in this room with his good, solid materialist's mind and his complete absence of imagination, and he'll find the most boring possible explanation for all of it, and I will be so profoundly, pathetically grateful that I may embarrass myself. He has always laughed at what he calls my fancies. For once, I am counting on it exactly that. December 2nd. There is something I haven't written down. I've been aware of it the whole time, keeping it at the edges of my attention, refusing to let it come fully into focus, the way you avoid looking directly at something bright because you know what looking at it directly will cost you. But it's been growing, quietly, steadily, the way things grow in the dark, and I don't think I can keep it at the edges much longer.
I've been trying to write this for days. Every time I approach it directly, it dissolves. The way a tune you almost remember vanishes the instant you try to hum it. The thought is there. I can feel its weight, its shape, the space it occupies somewhere behind conscious thought. But the moment I turn to face it fully, it retreats, crouching, waiting, never quite springing. So I will try to describe it from the side. The thoughts are not mine. That is the simplest way to say it, and the most disturbing. I will be sitting by the fire or holding a book I've stopped reading or simply existing in the particular vacancy of an unoccupied mind, and something will move through me that I did not generate. Ideas, conceptions, entire currents of thought that belong to a temperament completely unlike my own. Foreign in the way that a voice in another language is foreign. You know it is language, you know it means something, but the meaning belongs to someone else entirely. They come when I am not concentrating, when the mind goes soft and unguarded, and they feel inhabited, as if thinking were happening in my head, but not by me. As if someone were sitting just behind my thoughts, using them like a room they've let themselves into while I wasn't looking. I tell myself it's the liver, the nerves, overwork and undersleep, and too much time alone in a house that has too much silence in it. When I'm working hard, they retreat, so I work harder. I take longer walks. I keep the mind occupied and loud and full of its own noise. But the moment I stop, they're there, waiting, alive in a way that my own thoughts, frankly, often are not. And then there is the other thing. I have saved this for last because I have not been able to look at it directly until now. It has happened twice. Only twice in all these weeks, and each time it passed so quickly that I might have dismissed it, except for what it left behind. The cold sweat, the heart going wrong in my chest, the hands that wouldn't stop shaking for minutes afterwards. It comes like a wave of heat first, fever heat, sudden and total, as if the temperature of the air has changed in a single second, and with it, a knowledge. Not a fear, not a suspicion, a knowledge, immediate and absolute and physical, of the proximity of something diseased, something mortally, loathsomely sick. The air thickens with it. For a few seconds I can almost taste it, and through my mind, like white fire, the names of every fatal illness I have ever read or heard or feared go blazing past in a single, terrible procession. Then it passes, leaving me cold and hollow and slightly less certain of the world than I was before. I cannot explain it. I cannot explain the clammy skin and the palpitating heart that remain after it goes, real and physical and entirely beyond the reach of any theory about nerves or imagination.
but I know when I felt it most strongly. The night of the 28th, the dark stairwell, the crawling sound ahead of me on the stairs, and then that small square room under the roof, the door closed behind me, the two of us sealed in together in the dark. In that room, in that moment, it wasn't a feeling anymore. It was a presence, the actual concentrated essence of something ancient and malignant and sick beyond any sickness that has a name in any medical text I have ever read or heard. It was in the air I was breathing. It was in the cold that went deeper than temperature. It pressed against me in the dark with the quiet, patient certainty of something that has been waiting a very long time and knows it only has to keep waiting. I have never felt anything like it before. I pray, with a sincerity I have not brought to prayer since childhood. I never feel it again.
There it is, written down at last, in black and white, in my own hand, on a page I cannot now unwrite. The night of the 28th was real, every second of it. The cold, the smell, the crawling sound on the stairs, the shape leaning over the balustrade with that enormous head and those wrong, heavy shoulders, all of it was as real as this desk, this pen, this hand holding it. The entry I wrote afterward, the careful, dismissive little paragraph about sleepwalking and dream figures and wretched nerves, that was the lie. Written by a man who understood, even as he was writing it, that acknowledging the truth in words would make the truth larger than he could survive. I am acknowledging it now, and I find I am still here. December 3rd. I have the facts laid out in order, the way you lay out evidence before a court. I can recite them cleanly, without trembling if I concentrate. The knocking that had no one behind it, the well-dressed caller who entered the hall and left no footsteps and no trace, the light in the window of a room that has no blind, the man in the snow whose boots left nothing in the snow, the clothes scattered across my floor in the dark, Emily, sent away within a day of beginning to tell me something, the landlady and her gray, careful silences, the listener on the stairs, vast and wrong and clinging to the railing, the words that came in sleep like a mouth pressed to my ear, the wave of sickness, the thoughts that are not mine. I can see Chapter's face as I tell him all of this. The cool gray eyes, the slight, patient smile of a man who has already decided on his conclusion before the evidence has finished speaking. And then his voice, measured and kind and utterly immovable. You've been at the tea again. Underfeeding, I expect. Come to the south of France. And the thing is, God help me, part of me wants him to be right. Part of me would accept that verdict with more relief than I have felt about anything in months. I would follow him to the south of France without a backward glance and never write another word about this house and call it the best decision I ever made. But the facts are the facts, and they are waiting for him. December 5th. The nightlight has been burning every night since the 28th. Small, steady, reliable, and the sleep it bought me was clean and dark and empty of everything. Until last night. I came awake all at once, not gradually, not through layers of half-sleep, but instantly and completely, the way you wake when something in the room has changed. He was at the dressing table, standing in front of the mirror, looking at himself,
or doing whatever it is that he does when he stands in front of a mirror, because I am no longer certain that what I mean by looking and what he means by it are the same thing at all. The door was locked. I had checked it myself before sleeping. It was still locked. I could see the key in the lock from where I lay, and it had not moved. I could not move either. The cold came first, then the smell, thick and immediate, filling the room like smoke from everywhere at once, and then the horror, which was not like fear of a person or fear of pain, but something more fundamental than either, the horror of wrongness, of a thing existing that the world has no category for, pressing against the inside of my chest like a fist. I lay in the bed, and I watched him, and he stood at the mirror and did not look back. I could see his reflection in the mirror. That was the worst of it, that I had time to look at it, time to take it in detail by detail, the way you can't stop reading something that is destroying you. The head was enormous. The face beneath the tawny, wild hair was swollen and deeply lined, not with age exactly, but with something that had happened to the flesh from the inside, something that had reshaped it over time into a configuration that triggered a recognition so deep and so terrible that my mind refused to complete the thought. I knew what I was looking at. I knew the word for it. I will not write it here. The cheeks carried marks, bronze-colored, several of them. He was examining them in the glass with a slow, methodical attention, leaning close to his own reflection, studying himself with the detached focus of a man taking inventory of damage. The lips were pale, thick, too large for the face they occupied. One hand was hidden. The other rested on the ivory back of my hairbrush, and it was the hand that finally broke something open in me, because it was not a hand any more in any sense I could reconcile with the human. The fingers had been consumed to near nothing, the skin drawn tight and puckered across the back, the muscles contracted into a fixed, permanent tension. It crouched on the hairbrush the way a spider crouches on a wall, waiting, always waiting. And then he turned, slowly, completely, and looked at me with eyes that were small and pale and set so deep in that massive, ruined face that they seemed to be looking out from somewhere very far away, from inside something that once was a person and had since become this. The room disappeared. I heard myself make a sound, loud, raw, not a word, and then the dark came up from below and took everything. I came back to consciousness with the ceiling above me and my clothes on the floor. All of them. Again. I lay still for a long time, cataloging the ceiling, refusing to move my eyes toward the dressing table. My hands were shaking with a violence I couldn't control. Not trembling, shaking, the way a structure shakes when something fundamental inside it has been compromised. I could not eat. I tried twice, and my body rejected it both times, and the second time there was blood, which I noted with the distant, almost academic calm of a man whose capacity for fresh alarm has been temporarily exhausted. I decided I would go to Chapter's hotel, find out when he was expected, sit somewhere public and ordinary and full of the sounds of living people until the world reassembled itself into something navigable. I was still dressing when the hansom arrived, and then the door opened, and there he was. Chapter. I cannot adequately describe what the sight of him did to me. That solid, unremarkable face, those quiet, skeptical gray eyes that have never once entertained a thought they couldn't verify. The handshake, firm, warm, entirely present, that felt like being handed back a piece of myself I hadn't realized I'd lost. I felt the night recede, not vanish, recede, pull back to a safer distance, the way a tide pulls back from shore. And then, as the warmth of him settled over me, and the visions began to lose their edges, I understood the problem. Chapter is the kind of man whose solidity actively destroys the fragile architecture of the inexplicable. In his presence, the thing I had seen in the mirror, the details I had catalogued with such horrible clarity in the dark, were already beginning to feel like the contents of a fever dream. Not because they were, but because he was, here, breathing the same air, occupying the same room, and his reality was so much louder than the other kind. How do you tell a man like Chapter what you saw in the mirror? How do you rebuild that face in words, in daylight, across a table from someone's eyes are already preparing their verdict? I looked at him, and I did not know where to begin.
We talked. Or rather, we performed the act of talking. The words were there, the sentences complete, the topics reasonable. His travels, mutual acquaintances, the interval since we'd last seen each other. All of it entirely normal, entirely hollow. Two men sitting across from each other and filling the air between them with sound, while the real things waited in the wings. I was barely listening. My mind was crouched behind my eyes, watching for the opening, the pause, the shift in tone, the moment when I could finally set it all down in front of him. The mirror, the face, the smell, the hand on my hairbrush like a dead spider. I had it all ready, loaded and aimed. And then I noticed. He was doing the same thing. The slight distraction behind his eyes, the way his sentences arrived a half-beat late, as if being retrieved from somewhere else. He was talking, yes, but he was also waiting, holding something back with the careful, deliberate effort of a man carrying something fragile across a room. He had a bomb of his own. We sat there for the better part of half an hour, two men with loaded weapons, each waiting for the other to put his down first. The conversation strained under the weight of everything it wasn't saying. So I let go. I pulled back from my own story, released my grip on it entirely, and watched what happened to him when the opposing pressure disappeared. It was almost immediate. The travel anecdotes lost their color. The sentences grew shorter, then further apart. He repeated himself once, then caught it, then repeated himself again without catching it. His voice went through the motions while his mind went somewhere else. Then it simply stopped. He looked up, directly at me, and his eyes, for the first time since he'd walked through the door, were completely serious. "I say..." He stopped. I waited. Didn't speak, didn't move. The silence between us had a texture now, dense, loaded, leaning forward. "I say," he tried again, and this time pushed through it. "What in the world made you come to this place? These rooms, I mean." "They're cheap," I said, "and central, and they're too cheap." His voice was flat, certain. "Didn't you ask why?" It never occurred to me. He looked away. His eyes found a point somewhere on the floor between us and stayed there. And in the silence that followed, I became aware of my own heartbeat in a way that was not comfortable. "For God's sakes," I said, and my voice came out with an edge I hadn't intended. "Just tell me." "This is where Blunt lived," Chapter said, quietly. "The way you say something you've been carrying for a long time and have finally decided to put down. This is where he died." I had never heard the name Blunt in my life. I didn't know who he was talking about. And yet something in my body understood before my mind did, my mouth going dry, my hands finding the arms of the chair, the trembling starting somewhere deep and working its way outward. Chapter turned to the window. His shoulders moved with a shiver he didn't try to hide. "He got so terrible toward the end," he said. "I thought I could stand anything. I always believed that about myself. But this, it got into my dreams. It followed me home. It wouldn't let go." I said nothing. There was nothing to say. "First time I've been back," he went on, almost whispering now. "And I can feel it. The place still has it. Whatever it was, it's still here." He looked at me properly for the first time since he'd started speaking. "You look dreadful, old man. Genuinely dreadful." "I've signed the lease," I said. The laugh that came with it didn't sound like mine. "A full year. I thought it was a bargain." Chapter shuddered, actually shuddered. This man who had crossed continents and laughed at my fancies for 15 years and pulled his coat tighter around his throat. When he spoke again, his voice was low, and every few words he glanced behind him, quickly, the way you check a dark doorway you've already checked twice. I could have sworn in that moment that there was someone else in the room with us. He did it himself, and no one blamed him for it, not after what he'd been through. A pause. For the last 2 years he wore a veil when he went out, a closed carriage always. Even the nurse, the one who'd stayed longer than anyone thought humanly possible, even she had to leave in the end. He stopped, looked at his hands. His feet were gone, both of them, at his hands nearly. He moved on the floor, on all fours. The crawling sound. The confused, dragging motion I had heard in the dark. The thing that moved through my front room at night and came to stand beside my bed. The shape on the stairs that clung to the railing rather than stood on it. The room tilted slightly. "The smell," said Chapter, "was... Stop!" It came out harder than I intended. He stopped. I sat with my hands pressed flat on my knees and breathed and waited for the hot and cold to pass, and eventually it did, mostly. "Poor devil," Chapter said softly after a while. "He always asked if he could take the veil off when I visited, always asked if I minded. I used to stand by the open window." A long pause. He never touched me. "These rooms," I said carefully. "Did he live in these rooms?" Chapter headed his head. "The top floor, that small square room under the roof. He chose it because it was dark. He was afraid of being seen from the street. There were crowds sometimes waiting below the windows, hoping to catch a glimpse of his face." The small square room. The cold. The smell that had no name. The 2 black windows. The space where I had stood with a candle and felt the air press against me like something that had taken up permanent residence and had no intention of leaving. His room. "But there were hospitals," I heard myself say.
He wouldn't go near one, and they didn't feel they could force him. Chapter's voice had dropped to something barely above a murmur now. The room felt smaller than it had an hour ago. "They say it isn't contagious, so there was nothing, legally, medically, to compel him to leave. He stayed. He read. Medical books, mostly. Pharmacology. Drugs and their effects and their doses." I raised my hand. He understood and stopped. Some descriptions, once heard, cannot be unheard. I had already accumulated more than enough. "He knew what he was," Chapter said after a moment. "He knew what he cost, what it meant to the people around him, to anyone who came near. One night, I think, The knowing became too heavy to carry any further. He looked at the floor. He had access to whatever he needed. In the morning, they found him on the floor. The floor of that small square room, the bare boards with their worn, low tracks, the cold that lived there like a tenant, the smell that had followed me down 2 flights of stairs and into my sleep. 2 years ago, Chapter said, and they had estimated he had several years still left. The silence that followed had a shape to it. I couldn't hold it any longer. "Then for God's sake, tell me what it was." My voice came out raw. "Tell me what he had, now." Chapter looked up, and in his eyes, behind the steadiness, behind the deliberate calm, was something that looked almost like disbelief. He leaned forward. The distance between us closed to nothing, and then his lips moved, barely moved, around a word that carried the weight of centuries, a word that arrived not as sound, but as something older than sound, something that bypassed the ear entirely and landed in the oldest, most animal part of the mind, the part that remembers fires built against the dark and warnings carved into stone. The word was almost inaudible. It didn't need to be loud. He was a leper. The room held it. I held it. And in the silence that followed, in the cold December light, in this house that had been his house, in these rooms that sat below his room, below the floor where they had found him, every door opened at once. The smell, the crawling, the hand at the mirror examining bronze-colored marks on ruined skin, the voice in my sleep, patient and desperate and endlessly repeating, "I want your body. I want its covering. I'm waiting. I'm always listening." A man who had lost everything the flesh could lose, watching me from the dark, watching me breathe and move and inhabit a body that still worked, that still held together, that still had everything he had been stripped of, piece by piece, over years of slow, merciless erasure. Not malice, hunger. The most ancient, most human hunger there is.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.